So what is the designer's line for the coding lab?
Well, the interesting thing, which, well, maybe not so interesting, but a lot of people that are actually designing interfaces have a background in a certain area, and in my opinion, interface design, it's a mixture of a lot of different things, and not everybody has a very wide view of the actual broad scope of. There's the software development side of things, and there's the sort of ergonomics side of things about the Fitts law and movement and things like that, and there's information design, just sort of structuring the information and putting it in a way that's organized and easy for people to access. And there's also graphic design, which is what I'm from, and I'm quite interested in the idea of visual communication and being able to communicate through an interface visually with people. And there are a few different tricks for that which perhaps people from a programmer's background haven't been told explicitly, but there's things from design classes that I've had from university and things like that may be helpful in some way. But I'd rather talk about that stuff a little bit later if we can get some specific questions and things, because I have a few notes, but like I said before, I'd rather be a bit more informal and have more discussion to start with.
Sure.
So, at least my personal opinion as it stands right now is that the way 3D is heading, of course I'm going to be biased because that's my particular area, but I think that the idea of interface is going to be a lot more important in the future than it definitely has in the last few years. And we can see now that, especially within the high-end packages between Maya and XSI and so on, that when you look at a new release, the features aren't really that revolutionary. A lot of them are quite evolutionary, and they're quite similar between each other. I mean, there's not really much that you can do, say, in Maya that you can't do in XSI, and likewise. And I think what's going to start informing people's decisions a lot more about what they're going to use is things like interface and workflow and how well they can be adapted, or whether the software can be adapted to their particular tasks. And I think proof of this is in the release of Modo, and I haven't had a chance to try it myself, I'd love to, but at least from the comments online, Modo doesn't seem to contain many tools that are really revolutionary. It's not anything quite new like ZBrush. It doesn't have these great new things like that topology brush and stylo. They've just concentrated on doing a standard modeler, but the number one importance for them has been on getting the interface working really, really well. And even though it's something that a lot of the tools themselves are things that other people would already have in other applications, there's been a lot of interest in Modo, and a lot of people paying the extremely high price of $750 compared to another application like Silo or something, which is still quite good. But it does show that there are a lot of people interested in being able to have something that they can work with very easily and naturally. So, as well as the technical side of things, which everyone knows is important, and it's historically always been important, like having a rendering technology and animation technology and so on and so forth. I think we're going to see a lot more competition in the area of interface and workflow in the future as people start to get a bit more par for par in terms of features and things like that. So
I think it's very difficult to find out what exactly Maya or something else the studio are heading at. In a SIGGRAPH, it's very difficult to find the signals. Okay, what are they doing? They still seem to be targeting a design market, super high-end movie industry, people who work on the most expensive projects you can think of. I still think that's dangerous, but this is getting out of control. The complexity of a movie production in practice means that you have 2 times more developers than artists, so you assign to every artist 2 assistants, and they make mail scripts or converters and whatever in-house software to make sure that for this specific scene because you have an animation scene of 1 minute, and you work on that for like 2 months, so you can develop exactly for that specific task something unique. And that's, so you cannot have that all in one package. That's the conflict a little bit. I think that's what you mean too. So Bodo try to focus on only one thing, something vision service modeling, and try to make the
Do it
workflow
really well.
as fast, as easy, as nice, as pleasant as possible.
Yeah.
So you have a modeler tool. That's it.
Yeah. And the other thing which sort of contributes to this, I think, as well, is, well, I guess you can see it in their slogan of XSI using their cheap version of 3 democracy. And it's a lot. They have their slogan, 3 democracy, 3D democracy. It's
Exercise?
yeah,
the
cheaper one, the foundation, fundamentals, whatever it's called.
Oh, I remember.
And compared to say 10 years ago, where the only people doing 3D were like people at ILM, and they had the teams of programmers and extremely expensive SDI machines. Things are a lot cheaper now, and things are much easier for average people to get into, and people not necessarily in the high-end movie industry, but people in video and commercials, and then spreading out into other things like visualizations, and people I've worked a lot with in design field doing all sorts of things like packaging design using 3D, and because this is spreading out, it makes sense to not have these systems which you need teams of programmers to be able to actually get results out of. And so concentrating on how ordinary people can still get decent results without having a bubblegum kind of interface like in Carrara. Yes. I think that's an important goal to try and aim for.
Is there anyone here who likes to defend the bubblegum interface? Good. I mean, it is a topic that keeps popping up in the community and the users. So there are people who like Blender because of this accessibility. It's free and open source, so you can get it. And they're not specifically artists or interested in getting a career as a designer or whatever. They like to do it because it's nice to do for 1 or 2 hours in the evening and play a little bit with 3D. And for them, the bubblegum interface will give much more instant satisfaction. Like Wise or so, you click on a few buttons and then you have a beautiful landscape. That's instant results. But maybe we should try to, you could, if some developers think that's interesting, I mean, we can host a project on that for the bubblegum blender. They can use some parts of the core or so, and then make some interface with all nice big icons with beautiful landscape 1 and sunset and whatever. You click on that, and then you just combine some layers or scenes, and then you press the big render button. And,
No, I think it would be the presets that would make them happy. I mean, if there would be a library that would be easily accessible and have like a set of preset materials, preset meshes, preset stuff, which it is possible, but just make.
Well, it's also possible to present that as a resource page, right?
Yeah.
With downloadable plans or something. From artists to artists or something like that. It doesn't have to be hard coded.
But my usual reaction to something like that, if people say I would like to have easier access to blah blah feature, even when it's bubblegum, it's always good to look at, okay, what would a power user benefit from it? If you can find a way to do it that works for people who really use it every day in their productivity, and their productivity can be improved by adding something like it, that's fine. You usually can design things in a way that more people benefit from it. But if it's only for beginners, then it's dangerous, because when you start doing that, then you start blocking people who want to use it more professionally.
I think
what might help if you, there's a nice book of Raskin about domain interface, and he underlines that the underlining thing is orthogonal principles. So orthogonal principles, right? So if you can make the user interface more simple by just using very consistently a few principles, then both parties are winning. I mean, the beginners are winning, because if you understand the principles, it's easy to work with. And the professionals winning because you have less buttons, less menus, less of everything.
I love the book of Raskin. It's really a great theorist. Yeah.
Yes, it's really nice, because he makes clear that a good user interface is not just by interviewing users. You have to be consistent in your principles.
I agree that consistency is an important thing. We already have a lot of that in Blender. For example, you can use the A button to select all the different windows. And I think that really helps to the user to apply one thing he learns to a different part. So once he's learning one thing, he can make it easy to use that knowledge to do something different. And you could even go further with that in interface design, and maybe think about how you can make things even more consistent. So you just keep on applying that knowledge that you. So you can sort of a consistent principle.
The inconsistencies are not there because we like to make it inconsistent. Keeping things consistent is just work. That's just a lot of extra work, because if you test everything, oh shit, now you have to do it there and there and there. Because if you add something new in editor A, then the consistency means that you have to do it all over again. Or have to change things all over again, and have tested it. So we need more people who like to be involved also on the development side of the interface. The second menu, do the menus really do what they say they do? Is this also consistent in all the editors, like the AP or whatever case we have? Yes, we need that.
Yeah, coding the feature behind it is not the most difficult part, I think. Getting things consistent, that's hard work. And I think a non-developer is even able to help in that area. You don't have to be a developer to find out, hey, this thing is inconsistent with that.
One of the tools we have on macOS to ensure you have consistent interface is Interface Builder, which is a tool which lets you graphically move put the buttons and so on, but also answer that the working behind is always the same. And that may be also a method to have our own, not use Interface Builder of course, but to have our own design UI specialized program to answer this consistency. The method in the you can ensure the consistency also of the message passed by the button and such sort of things.
That's very true, but I think the other thing that's involved in this is that it's not just a technical issue.
It's designers also.
Yeah, well, it's not even a designer's issue too. And I think one thing that we're experiencing with Blender being so young and the organization being so young is that, as Nathan Wergery was talking to me about the other nights, is that he really thinks that we can really improve communication between the people involved, and not just between developers, but between developers and users, developers and other developers. And if we all have a clear picture of where we're going, and we all have a clear understanding of how to do things in a certain way, it becomes so much easier to make things consistent. Because when people are just working on their own and not communicating to anyone else and not sharing information, then people come up with their own ways of doing the same thing, and it just gets fragmented. So one thing which I would like to see, and I think it would be very useful, not just in terms of running the project, to have a really good system of communication between the people involved. But I think that would also reflect in a much more better product in Blender, being more consistent with more consistent ways of doing things and solving problems within the tools that people are using. And so maybe this is something that we can evolve over time.
How do you think we construct that? How do we organize that?
Isn't the wiki one part of the solution?
I have a question. He said a very right thing, that a user interface should be consistent to its basic principles. Now the question I have is, are these principles in Blender well defined? I mean,
Yeah.
are they known already?
Yeah, like the best thing for the GNOME desktop in terms of consistency and the interface was the HIG, the Human Interface Guidelines, which is a document that defines not only the little things like, you know, the buttons should be aligned such and such, but like the major philosophy behind the GNOME desktop, which is, you know, making the decisions in the interface for the user, not give him millions of options to choose from that he doesn't really, you know, want to be deciding upon and stuff like that. So having a document that outlines what makes Blender interface really would help developers, you know, to write good additions to Blender if they have a document that they can check with.
We have that problem with Blender almost on every topic. So, what the whole source code, or what is a good type of code, how do you add in the right way new features, but what is a good way to add a panel or buttons, all these things still have to be formalized. So some things just go by accident, somebody does something and nobody complains.
And if everybody steps in and starts working on this, don't worry about people bitching about, you know, oh, well, we should have, you know, it's good to have something outlined, and then, you know, you gotta have a small team figuring it out, not be very democratic about it, and then, you know, stick to the rules, because otherwise everybody has got his own opinion, and it's like,
or what I learned from one of the SIG-Chi conferences, if you have a number of alternatives, work out a number of alternatives, and you push them side by side, and you look at them, you immediately see what the best alternative is in user interfaces. So it's very clear if somebody has thought about it and about try to make a consistent set and present that, and you compare that the different things. I mean, yesterday you saw the different tools, and you get a concept in your head what you really like because you see the different tools.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's also important for making the interface better. You should have different groups working out certain different sidelines. And then combine it again, and then loop, because then you have the right discussion, because then you can compare alternatives.
There's also another layer to that which makes it quite complicated too, and that's the historical issue of how has Blender always worked in the past, and are we going to change this to something else, or are we going to keep using the same sort of concepts? And working out this idea of the scope or the general theory behind working with Blender, actually formulating that into something a bit more concrete than just ideas in all of our heads.
I know we have sometimes debates on the IRC with questions like, yeah, but what is Blender? Yeah?
Exactly.
Also, if you look at making a website, you go to blender.org or blender3d.org, you don't know anything. So, at a Maya website or Exercise or 3D Studio, they try to communicate with you, well, Maya is the ultimate studio solution for professional 3D artists, and if you buy our software, you will be a great 3D artist. Something like that. It's cool, and you have tattoos. Maya tries to explain what it is, and most people do have a perception of what Maya is, and what Exercise is, and what 3D Studio is. And I think the companies themselves also have that idea. They think they know what their software is and where it should go a little bit. And for Blender, that's very grey. I mean, we know a little bit the past, and the whole past, that is what Blender is. But it doesn't really communicate well. You have to know the past to know what it is. If you just go to the website or download the software. What is it?
Well, it might be different. I'm rather new. I know now Blender for half a year.
Yeah.
So, and my metaphor of Blender, it's a repository of objects with 3 composition rules. You can link objects, you can group objects, and you can string objects with each other.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my simple view on Blender. And the nice thing, the whole thing is transparent. The whole thing is transparent. Just the objects and the composition rules are transparent. I mean, there's a lot of noise about it, but the basic thing is you have a very open, And so if it's coming from a library or is in store or in core, doesn't matter. So you have a library of objects. You have a repository of objects. And the way of composition, you are very free. You can link them, you can group them, and you use the objects to each
How
other.
did you find out what you say? By using it, or did you read the book, or
Just by using and try to grasp why in the beginning I think it is very difficult. And then I found your article about the architecture.
did it help?
And that was really, I mean, that was what I intuitively thought it was. And so I think you must be great. I mean, what's your background? I immediately thought, what's your background? This guy that is very good, because this is what a good software engineering is doing. I mean, composing. I mean, what's your background? Did you do mathematics or?
Every software engineer I know really thinks it's the most ridiculous thing in the world.
Yes.
So there are some side effects.
The basic modeling is very clever.
Yeah,
Because in object-oriented programming, we have always the problem of inheritance, and you have a model of delegation that's much better. I mean, that's much more fundamental. You don't realize it yourself.
You can write an article about what the software engineers can learn of what Mende is doing. Because I don't have that background. I never studied development theories or architecture on software design.
So you have
it's very difficult for me to communicate with people who know, because they know words like you do as well. And then I get lost. Oh, yes, the difference between object orientation
doesn't
and
matter. I mean, you can do it by nature.
inheritance.
No problem. There's no problem. I mean, so you are. I think you are an architect by nature then.
Maybe.
Yeah. Because I think that the fundament is very good. I didn't look at the details of the C code or so, but it's the concept.
That's also a little bit.
And it's very orthogonal. I was really surprised because I showed this afternoon some things, and I was surprised because with just a few lines everything was working. I mean,
But apart from all the nice words you say, I mean, if you look at the process you went through,
yeah.
so after reading a specific part of the philosophy behind Blender or the architecture behind it, it snapped something in you that you could use it. But is that because of you? Are you somebody who likes to know really what is inside? So you look, when you buy a car, you look, there's a 5-liter engine with 20 things in it.
Not on the technical detail. I have to grasp the concept. So I have to grasp the concept.
Because that's something that you didn't really mention in your talk yesterday, when you had about metaphors and how interfaces work. A lot of metaphors also didn't start because some brilliant interface designer thought about it. For example, this whole nodal editing is just following software architecture.
Yeah.
This is how software architecture works with C++ and data structures like to construct their development environment with modules and all kinds of APIs that can talk to each other, and that visualize is really easy with all these nice diagrams and lines. And it's most likely that in 4 years or 5 years software architecture moves to some other trend which gives completely different interfaces. So a nodal editing system is not good in itself. It is good because it can be a representation of the architecture that's behind it. So for Blender, if you want to look at what is a good interface, you cannot only look at the whole world, so what would be the most beautiful interface in the world? It's good to look at, okay, but what do we have? What is this architecture? What's behind it? Because if you can optimal use that, then you have a good interface too, even when it's limited.
Well, you can't have a good interface if what you actually see isn't how it's working.
Lots of software do that.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean it's good.
That's a common problem. Yeah.
But I also think it's interesting when talking about the history, then if you talk about changing things in the interface, and to what degree can we like change, say, a name of a button? Because because then you lose the. It's a danger because then the old users they'll get confused and And so it's interesting to kind of really discuss like to what degree should you like change it, even if you have like a really good idea about it's really great. But then again, it's always the danger that you don't like you lose everyone that was used to the old way.
Well, there's also a problem of communication too, because the old users might start confusing new users, which happens a lot. I do it quite often. Because I remember the hard way to do things sometimes, and sometimes there's this new, easy way to do it. And so, for example, currently in Blender you can hit Control-M and get a nice mirroring menu to mirror things on an axis. And I said, oh yeah, just press S, X, 1, minus, Enter, you know? and that maybe isn't what I want to hear.
But it used to be X, X.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that changed.
So that's 2 extra keys.
I actually kind of liked that because it was kind of like playing a fighting game where you have a big combo key press.
Maybe that's the definition of Blender. Fighting game.
Character down in the corner every time you press a hotkey makes it a special.
Yeah.
It
can be done through verse.
If you look at some of the criticisms on the user interface project we do, security is one of them. There are things to say that we should solve really, because the simplicity and the overview of Blender 2.25. Not so many buttons, not so many features, not so many icons. I know that, but it was also nice, because you could have all the buttons for the material in one little 4 panel wide, one window wide setting. That's it. And you have all the icons in the header, and just click, 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 and you can use the software. I know why we improved it, but for a lot of people it's also not a real improvement. So the improvement of adding new features, which invoked redoing the interface as well, because you have more options than you can show all at once. You can also look at it like, do we really need a feature like that? Do we have to add anything anyone could think of? Because then you end up with so much that it's not usable anymore. So it's better to have then one way to do A, and one way to do B, and one way to do C, and let the user just do A, B, C. Instead of developing tool A, B, C, and tool B, C, A, and tool... you understand what I mean?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But we have a little bit of that in Blender. It's also because developers like that and things, and we have to reward them. But at a certain moment we should stop adding more interesting fancy selection features and other different types of ways. But if you can already do it, or if you can deconstruct it to the simplest thing, the simplest tool possible, and it's better to do 4 things in a row than have a long menu with all the combinations in it. You agree on that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I actually disagree at some point, because like you're saying, it's not good to have. If you can do it a few, say by 4 steps, sometimes it's better to do it that way. But if you're, I made just a little custom Python script recently, which selects spaces by their image, area, like different buttons, one for image, one for area, proportions of edges, the mode, all different things, and also by linked, ones that were next to each other, linked image, as in like the L key, but with the different properties. And when you're doing massive meshes which have hundreds of images, hundreds of different faces, it can be really nice to be able to select all the faces of columns, say, along an edge. Now, that's not really in Blender, or kind of it is for a Python script, which is kind of hard to access at the moment. But it's important to be able to have some of that special functionality accessible too. Like it's you can say, oh, well, we'll just have a select say image, and we won't have anything else there, which is currently the way it is. But sometimes you do need that extra functionality, and if it's not there, well, it's really, really difficult to select what you want on a large mesh.
One example of does it better or do it the simple way is the instance mirroring modeling. We have actually in Blender, we don't have it. We use an instance copy, we mirror it, and then we work. In many applications, you have directly a function to do that. We choose the plane of instance. And actually, it's quite good to have it instead of two basic functions. It's not much work to do the two basic functions, but it's quite good because it's no cost for the power user, except perhaps a button, but it's much easier to the less more beginner user. And one key of doing things, I don't like much, I use cat tools, but I don't like them much. But one thing cat tools have, all cat tools have an overwhelming amount of buttons. They have thousands and thousands and thousands of functions. And then all cat tools propose you to create your own palettes with some function. You take the function, you put it in your palette, and it's your personalized palette.
I think this is tying into what Jacob was saying before about just defining this sort of general feel and what we should aim for. I think it's this real debate of, do we want generalized tools that we can let users put together on their own, or do we want a specialized tool for every single circumstance? And I guess this is sometimes a philosophical debate, like different programs do it different ways, different people like it different ways. Right now in Blender there's not really a clear direction of what is the philosophy are we going to give. Like in a node-based program, it's usually about people constructing their own little node tools for themselves, or are we going to, is it something where every single thing has its own button? And that's something which I think we really need to work through and just make decisions on.
One thing about not making too many functions, you could discuss that certain functions, like already in Blender, I think, for example, everyone knows the draw faces button, and it's one of the end of it. It's really good because you really get a nice, easy view of what you got selected. But does anyone ever not use that or find a situation where they would not want to have that on? Because that could be the kind of thing you could think about. Like, do we even need to have that off? Does that need to be an option? And
yes. It's not always.
One of the big problems.
But we do have the selection mode, so you can connect it to face selection mode and have it default on in face selection mode.
Is that you guys are very open to all sorts of users. I mean, when you want to do simplify the interface based on use cases, you have a certain user that you're doing so that you have animators, you have the robotic stuff that I saw, you have architects wanting to use Blender, and all these user groups want completely different functionalities. Do you actually really want
designers that use it?
And they're all starters and advanced users and experts, and it's not clear, I think, to anybody what the goals are, and you cannot fit the feature you want to make into any of those categories. And it's the same problem with the website. You can't organize the website because you don't know what the categories are. And so it's fair, and the features are mostly made by people who want to make a certain feature. They're not like, I want to make the blah 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 blah. It's great. I always love that. Okay, so how useful is it to what group? And I think that's something you need to solve, or to write down, make a little matrix. I don't know.
But what I really missed, I mean, that's okay. My background is New CEO Studio. We have an animation project coming in, and then we sit together with the animators and we have a problem to solve. And that's usually the technical tool and the design issues. So, for example, last SIGGRAPH, I had dinner with Anthony Shearhut, who was doing the pre-visualization of the Spider-Man movie. It was such an exciting evening. Because he was just telling, okay, then the director comes in and he presents to me this character with the tentacles. And now I have to animate the tentacles. So how do I get decent, good-looking, and fast animated tentacles in Blender? That whole dissection of, okay, so you have in Blender this tool, and that tool, and that tool, and that tool, but then something blocks. You have to add a couple of things which are natural for Blender to add. It's not hackish or so. You could just add that and enable somebody to do that. And that kind of cooperation between people that could happen more. That a developer not adds a feature just because he likes to have some weird cool selection feature, but he works in a project with artists who make a movie, and they think, well, I have this tree, and the tree, I want to have 1 million leaves in it, and I need a way to have all the leaves doing something, whatever. I don't know, I have to think of whatever animation. But then you think of how do you realize it, how can I make that process going. And maybe if we do that a little bit more, we can find out how Blender can structure that way too. Because parts of that can be done in Python. I think Python should really serve for these purposes. And part of that should be of the core of tools you have in Blender.
There's another interesting thing, what you're saying there, is that the request is not a feature. You're posed with a problem. Like it's a description of, I have this problem. I want to be able to do this, this, and this. And not like, oh, I want to be able to do this, this, and this, so I'll need this, this, and this. Please make it, and then you describe what you think you need as a tool. Because probably it's better to have the developers think of the solution for the problem, and not let them make the tool I'm presenting that I think I need. At Neo Geo, I often told you, oh, I need this and this tool. And you said, oh, why? What's the problem? Well, I want to be able to do this and this. But isn't this a better tool then? Yeah, probably it is. and that's very important too. And like what you say with the wiki is like the feature request thing. I want all the balls to be blue. But why? Well, I don't tell you. I want you to make that. Okay, I'm not going to make it. I don't know why I should make something like that. But if I show you that maybe vertex, or it's easy to have my own set of colors on wireframes, because some of the wireframes I use as how do you call them? As locators, so I know this is not an object, but it's a helper for me. So I want this thing to be red. Then now I have to ask a developer, could you please make something like locators are red. And when I get the tool to color the wireframes myself, then I can decide what is a tool for me.
I think a good example, because if you start wireframe discussions, then we can go crazy for a while. But a very good example is what the people presented in virtual Brasilia, with the city. They were doing things with the game engine, and I really felt sorry for them. Because they were doing things on the edge of what was possible with that system. And at that moment you really need somebody technical to assist, to think with them. And then you would very quickly and easily make the life of such an artist 10 times easier. They're fighting with the limitations in the software too much. And thanks for you with the character animation. We spend too much time on too many things. I think we can make that 10 times faster.
That's true, but I have another comment going back to the whole orthogonal interface and doing things for beginners. And I'm specifically going to pick the mirrored modeling example. Is it really good for beginners to add this as a one-click feature? Because if you, first of all, if you don't add it, the interface remains orthogonal and consistent. It uses the same principle for making linked copies and transforming that Blender uses everywhere. If you learn to do it the quote-unquote hard way, you start to see a lot of that. You learn how to do that by doing it. Whereas if you're given a one-click button, make virtual mirror, you never see that. It gets hidden from you. So it obfuscates the program a little bit more. So you've done something quick, and it works for you now, and you get instant satisfaction, but you haven't learned that much in the process.
But that gives stronger weight on consistency.
Right.
And then we get to the NLA editor, which is
inconsistent.
Right.
But there's a further point here, is going to the power user side, making that particular feature a quick one-button thing isn't very useful, because it's not something you do a lot when you're working. In a normal workflow, if you're modeling, you make the mirrored instance once, and then you model maybe for days after that without ever touching that again. So, did you really benefit so much from making that a one-button shortcut overall? And I say you didn't. You know, it's easy to make a copy and scale it once you understand
the consequences of adding it. I mean, you can add it as a draw type.
Right.
So you draw extra mirror, and then
but I think
it just flips in the
but
right.
I think just adding it has worse consequences for the beginner than good ones.
Yes, but I think when you add something, it should be orthogonal what's already there.
Yeah.
So one of the things I am thinking about is adding a storyboard. So that you can use for beginners because you give them a story already, but it is built up of all the basic things that are already there. So you can use it as a one-button thing, the story, but you can also click it open, and then you see all the basic things that are happening. So it's a new object. It's a new object in the system, a storyboard, and so you can use that for a higher level composition. But then it's nice for the beginners. It's also nice for very experienced people.
You can start grouping things into
Photoshop actions.
I think that what I like about what he said is that's also my nasty habit. I also like to make life of other people a little bit more complicated. Because I have a mission. I have ideas, and I think other people should share these ideas too. So what he says is, by providing tools in a certain way, then if you set up a mirror in Blender, if you learn how to do that, you actually learn something. You get aha, or and now I've learned 3 things, and with these 3 little things I've learned, I can suddenly do a lot more.
Yeah.
While if you have just one button mirror, you don't learn anything.
Right.
And you learn where the button mirror is.
And when is it appropriate to learn something, and when is it just wasting your time when you actually want to get stuff done?
Yeah,
Well,
I think that's very good solved with Mel in Maya, because a lot of those buttons are Mel anyway. You don't know they're Mel when you start out, or if you're not into technical details. But once you start knowing it's Mel, then you can make your own functions. Like the AutoCAD thing was a bit ridiculous, of course, but it's a good thing. Once you get more experience in this mirrored crappy thing, you might write your own mirror thing, which has this select thing, copy it, mirror the copy, and place it somewhere. Then you can I, as an artist, can make my own tool. If I think the mirroring is important, I can make it, or maybe I can put it on the web and I can download it for. Hey, somebody made a mirror tool. And then the artists are less dependent on the developers.
This goes to another level. I mean, you'd have to understand Mel. You'd have to be not only an artist, but also
you don't need to understand Mel in Maya to make your own Mel scripts.
But it's not Mel. I think there's a problem with this where you do a number of actions in Maya and you get Mel scripts. But when you do them, you do stuff, and then when you want to know what that is, you have to sort of think of, okay, I did these 3 things, and there's a whole list of things I did in the Mel window. Which are the ones? And then I start to read and figure out what is
so
this
the implementation
part.
is not intuitive, but the idea is good.
Compare it to the actions in Photoshop. It's a lot more simpler when you can just go through it, and it doesn't have code. It says save file as in this directory with this size.
But I have some things I wrote down from my experience of stuff that I've done, and I'll start with configuration, because I think that configuration is a big problem, that people are just adding, everything should be configurable, and I guess that's good. but it also means that people don't design user interfaces anymore. Because everybody says, well, you can configure it. That's the standard answer if you have any complaints on Maya, is like, you can configure it. And that means that I should spend 90% of the time configuring Maya and then press one button and that should do everything. But people don't want to configure, people want to use the application. And I think that's a big problem where people think they don't have to make decisions because they have configurability. And I think that's completely wrong. So I'm all for it, but it's a very poor excuse.
But the interesting thing you're saying here is you have the assumption that people want to use it. You say people want to use it. Okay, but what do they want to use it for? I mean, you're talking probably about a professional who wants to make animations.
Yeah.
But we don't know that in Blender if there are professionals who want to make animations. There are people who might want to add a nice Neo Geo scene and render it and look at it rendering. And we don't know what the users are. And a lot of users today are developers who download the code and compile it. They're Blender users as well. They use it not as an artist tool, but as a development exercise.
I don't think that's enough. And I think that all the times that I've seen really good interfaces, there have been stuff that can be done in other applications, even though they're really configurable. One thing that I worked really hard on and that I've found really good is to pack your interface extremely tight. To have if you have a tool that you can draw a square to select polygons, what happens if you just click? Well, then you don't draw squares, you don't get any polygons, right? But if you implement it really good, it might mean that just a click might be able to select the polygon just by clicking on it. So you don't have to switch between a click tool and a drag tool because you can use the same tool. So then you start to think, okay, what should everything possible mean? Maybe if I click on a vertex, that should mean go to vertex select mode and select this vertex. And if I click on an edge, maybe that should mean go to edge mode, right? And when you start thinking about this and start thinking, everything I should possibly be able to do should mean something. And then you start to realize that you can add more and more features, and there's still just one button for doing all this. You don't have to switch between modes to click select and drag select, and you just get more functionality in there.
There's a limit to how far you can take that, though.
Sure, but you can
do everything with a one-button Mac mouse and the keyboard.
You can push everything a lot further than people do. And for instance, there's in Local Roman Modeler, there's just so many little tricks and things you can do that people don't know about. But I guess if it were good documentation, people would. But I think it's an important thing of okay, all applications have scale. But my application has scale where you can snap scale to fit things inside of an area. So if you want to scale in this direction, you can grab it here and get it to fit into a specific area, not just make it twice as big. That sort of thing is really helping. And it's not that big of a deal to do. You just sort of, once you've finished your scaling tool, you should always think, well, this is halfway. How can I make this really sort of neat in a way that it sort of fits everything? And I think making choices like that is really interesting because one of the things I really hate about Maya is that they haven't made a decision of how much they should tell the user. And that means that, for instance, if you have a light source, you get to decide if it's a ray traced light source or a shadow map light source. And there are some things you can only do if it's a shadow map based light source, and there are some things you can only do with ray traced. And this, I think, is really the problem because you have to know how application works. What you really want to do is say, this is a light source that does shadows, and I don't care how the application computes the shadows. I just want nice shadows. I don't want to, the application should pick the algorithm that works for whatever I want to do. And that's why I'm really against subdivision surface modeling where you can access the the polygons on the limit surface, because to me, subdivision modeler is a cage modeler, and you get a smooth surface. And from the user point of view, it's just smooth. They should know that, you know, it happens to be polygons so that we can draw it on the screen. That's just, you know, that should be invisible to the user. The user shouldn't have to care about tessellation and all those issues. You know, it's just like a nerve. It's a smooth surface.
Yeah, but the user needs to see the cage quite often, especially when you start out modeling an object. For a long time, you know, quite a few steps until it's really more than just a little roughed in.
I mean, you should
it's
see.
Much better to work with the cage than with the subdivided model.
Yeah, I'm
Big box modeling
yeah,
is an example. Your smooth shapes are actually a lot further away than what you have in mind than the cages. In the later stages of modeling, the smooth shape is now closer because you've added enough detail. So everything melts in the beginning.
You misunderstood what I said.
Yeah.
I want the cage. You're modeling with the cage,
right,
and you see the limit surface. And that gives you super control because you know what you're doing, right?
Right.
You have all the control points, you know where they are, you can grab them. Perfect. What some people do in some applications, like Maya, is let you grab a point on the limit surface as well and say, I've now subdivided this 3 times, and that's what you get, like hierarchical subdivision surfaces.
Yeah, but that's a good thing.
Because
it's a good thing.
Hierarchical.
Why do you say it's a bad thing? You say it's a bad thing, but
sucks.
why is it a bad thing?
It sucks because a couple of different reasons. The first thing is that you have huge loss of control of what you're doing. It gets very confusing. For instance, if
it gets confusing to you.
No, a lot of people. This is a very, very common issue that people have within the Maya community. For instance,
I'm not confused with it.
Listen to me.
No, you are taking away a tool from me. There is a tool in Maya which I like, which is I can control the subdivision and how much it is and how much subdivided it is on a certain area. Yeah, and you're saying that's not important to me. That's what you say.
I'm trying to make a point.
No, it's important for you, but not for all the others.
Yeah, okay, so we still don't know.
Listen to my argument before you kill it. Okay? Listen to my argument. Here's the problem. If you have a sphere, and you subdivide it 3 times, and then you pull out a thing, and then you look at it in subdivided 2 times, right? Then you don't see the change. So you might say, oh, this is perfectly what I wanted, and then you render it and it looks completely different, right?
Right.
And then you might say, and then you subdivide a little bit more, you get subdivision 4, and you say, I don't like the bulge, so you move it back, right?
But that's more, but just to interrupt, that's more of an implementation detail than actually the theory, because hierarchical subdivisions actually select a small area and say you want to add more detail here. You're saying that it's not shown and it gets confusing.
I'm saying, yeah,
but the fact of the matter is, maybe if you scale down to 2, it should leave that area more detailed.
Let me finish my point.
We need more people to talk.
Yeah, sure. If you have the sphere and you do 1 pull in release in subdivided measure 3, and then you go to 4 and make it back, you don't see the change, but there is a change in there. There's 2 changes that cancel out each other, and they're in different layers, and you can't find them. And that's very confusing.
I'd like to say something. I'd like to do a step back to what you say about packed information. I find this very, very interesting, but it is it's two decisions in one, because that's the main problem of Blender, and I must say I'm to blame that I haven't worked on it for the last year. But when you do a tool that is as powerful as your log area or something like that, where you really say this click means this, and if you drag it means something else, and if you drag with 2 mouse buttons, and it is very powerful, but it is not self-explanatory. Yes. And I'm one of the hard guys who says it doesn't have to be self-explanatory. It doesn't have to be at all self-explanatory. Can I? And it's always been said that Blender has a steep learning curve. There's of course a ladder for that curve. It is education, not documentation, education. Education, for example, means, and I've mentioned that, and I haven't written the tutorials, I'm to blame. I said, when you go to the Blender website and want to download Blender, don't leave the user alone with the program. I would say, put in front of the download area a sign that says, these basic tutorials are extremely important for a new user, and I strongly recommend to download these before you open up the first Blender. And always people said the buttons are confusing. Well, I mean, most of us know the buttons aren't confusing when you have worked 1 or 2 months with Blender, when you know them. But you don't need any button, for example, to, let's say, show the basic principles of G key, S key, and R key to move an object. So why do we leave the user with confusing buttons and no information, and just don't make a tutorial that has a sample file in it, and every one of us knows we can clear most of the buttons. So you have only 20 left. You don't need the button window to explain the G and S and R key. But we do it. We present Blender as it is, and I think that's the most
really
weak point.
I mean, education is good,
solves,
but it doesn't solve issues with the interface. Look at the master animator, and then he wouldn't remember that if he parents it to, I mean, a follow curve. There's 2 ways to follow a curve, and
yes, but
you
that's
simply
because
can't remember.
That's because there is now a curve path and the curve follow. That you only see when you're in edit mode of the curve, and there's a curve follow constraint. There are 2 or 3 parts, and there is a curve follow in the action buttons.
And interface glitch. Similarly, there's so many buttons. I can be educated, and I know that it works like that, but it's not consistent. There's no clues for me to, and I do it again, and I have to look up and I do it again because I know that it exists. Yes, I have to look it up.
But I really don't mean use education to cover inconsistency. No, that's not the point. That's not the point. And I find that, for example, the 2.23 Blender was one of the most, at least for my vision. It's not as educated as most of yours, but it was one of the most consistent tools that I had. If I see the interface, I don't want to flame war anyone, but if I now look at the interface, on the visual aspect, it is more okay. It is less buttons, that's right, but it is more or less. It is. The details are much more visual information than it is needed, let alone the small triangles.
The problem that the new grouping solves. It's two things. There's edit functionality, the flat button doesn't scale enough. You can't have 100 buttons on one page.
But you can have.
And also the vertical issue.
But I don't mean the position of the buttons. I mean the representation now. I mean that we wanted a beautifully looking interface, but it has the problem is the more visual information you put into that doesn't transport any real information strains the decryption of what you see.
Yeah, what I really liked about the old one was it was boring. It was a boring interface.
No, so it wouldn't.
Yeah, boring. So it wouldn't influence my work because I'm doing design work myself inside, and now I'm getting all this design around my design. I don't really like that. I like the way that it was like boring, great. I wouldn't see it. It wasn't there.
Yes,
I would look at my work,
and
not at your great work. It's beautiful, of course, but it's in the way. And that's the same thing with the bubblegum. I don't want the bubblegum to influence me, and I don't. Maya has a problem with the blue and red stuff.
Yeah,
it's all in the way.
It's also a question how fast you can decrypt what you see. I mean, every one of everyone who uses number buttons for 2 or 3 times, and if he's taught how to use them, that you can click on the left side and the right side, maybe use the return key or something like that, doesn't need those arrows anymore. So for 90.995% of your lifetime, you won't need this explanation that this is a number button, because you see it as a number button because it has a number in it.
But there's one the first rule written in the human interface guideline of Apple, which are very good one. The first written rule is that human interface must give feedback. And it's one of problem actually of your Blender interface. There is not enough feedback of what you are doing. For example, buttons which are not available in one mode are not disabled. So it's always an error to remove feedback. You must not, you can make that as small as you want, but you must not remove the arrow on the side, because it's hiding information. And user interface should never hide information. And this is really a baseline. That's one problem.
I think you have to be consistent with what you hide. And that's important.
You don't.
Because here's my thing. From a user's point of view, there are concepts that you have to know about. And if you have a concept, in some applications, you have a concept of something, and you can't really access it, right? You can't. There is a node structure in some applications, but there's no node tree where you can actually build it by hand. It's just a secret thing. So sometimes in the application, you realize there is a node structure, but they really try to hide it, behind lots of tools. And then I say that's a bad thing. It's okay that you have a node structure if it's completely invisible, and the users have no idea what's going on. But if you start giving away that it's a node structure, then you have to give the user total control of that and really say, this is a part of the user experience. This is something you should know as a user if you want to understand the application. You have to really draw the line of what to show, what to understand. And if you decide that something is under the hood, then it has to be under the hood. You can't sort of hint to it a little bit here and a little bit there. That sort of.
But the lesson of information visualization is the same what he's saying. Always show context and detail at the same time.
Yes.
And never. So the zooming metaphor is much better than the scrolling metaphor. So it's much better to what you don't see to make it smaller than to get it out of the way. I mean, that's much more intuitive. So there are experiments. We have seen. You showed some things of the information visualization, like the cone tree and things. So you are still seeing the whole tree.
One of the reasons also why Apple interface is so efficient is that there is a strong visual grouping, and it's a key thing. Blender goes this way with the palettes. It's a good step. Now we should think about how it's in the actual work done, how to visually correctly do this. But it's very important to group things, to show things which are related, to disable things which are not available, to show only what is relevant, but show all is relevant.
I think one issue that a lot of people perhaps maybe not so clear on is the difference between making something easy to learn, but also something that communicates and gives feedback, and that's something for everyone. I mean, the thing with the buttons and whatnot, when you're saying, the arrows on the side are not a good idea, but you start to then get into issues like, well, if everything looks the same, then it's so much more work for me to figure out what is what. I just have to remember it. What if there is a letter which has an I on it and a number that has a 1, and they look so similar, but they can do completely different things. And it's this, whether the implementation is good or bad, that's something that I'd like to hear feedback from you guys about. But I think it's very important that it's visually communicated how things work and what they are, and to get feedback about this.
Yeah, I want to add that. I think a little arrow is something different than feedback. So if I press on a non-arrowed button, I get feedback because the number changes. So I get feedback. I mean, it's important, but it's not that the arrow is not giving me the feedback. Maybe the arrow becoming from black to white can be feedback. But if the number also changes, I'm getting two feedbacks, and you can discuss if that's necessary. I mean, you can blink the screen white. It's feedback, but that's annoying feedback. So.
The feedback I was thinking of is not this one, is that the fact it's a field text, it's a button when you can enter information.
Yeah, so it's
not a field text, which is just showing information that you cannot change.
The button tells you what it is.
We have a problem
before you use it, basically.
Yeah, so that's not feedback. So
it's feedback, but it's visual feedback. I mean, before you do an action.
Yeah, so but then it's the whole screen is feedback on everything Blender can do. Blender can do this feedback.
Yeah, it sounds like overall.
Communication.
I just wanted to.
But another thing I want to add, because that's what you say with the configuration. I think that's very interesting. Well, we hear it a lot. It's like some people want this. It's bad that I have to event my configuration, which I don't know what it is, because I don't know the software and I don't know what it can do. So that's what I think what you hear is like yesterday in the other packages, that maybe some people who know something about it should make the configurations in Blender, like show 3 buttons if you're a beginner, show all the buttons if you're an expert, but then you need to know your target group, or I need to know what I am. Like, I'm a beginner architect. I want Blender to start in the beginner architect mode, which gives me no animation tools and only this and this tools and only this and that tools.
That's a concept that they did with the Nautilus application. They had a beginner, standard user, and an expert user, and every user thought he was an expert user.
Yeah,
so they removed it.
Then they can no longer complain that there are too many buttons, because they decided themselves they wanted all the buttons.
Yeah, but that's a concept that has been abandoned because of that idea.
The problem is that if you're a beginner and start in beginner mode, you don't become an expert on the application, you become an expert on the beginner mode. And then you switch to expert and you're beginner again. So it's not really working. But about the packing, because I think that the biggest problem in making 3D applications is that there's so much things you would be able to do, and there's so many features you can add that you really, you can have an explosion of a number of buttons, and that's why I have to sort of compress everything and think about whether things are really important. And in my application, you could say I failed to do a beginner-friendly application, and partially it's an experiment. So yes, I agreed to that. But there's many things you can do that isn't, that just the beginner wouldn't know about. For instance, if you have a button that says make things fat, if you press that with the left mouse button, it might make things thin, right? And nobody noticed if you're a beginner. It's just one of those little things you can learn, later on. Where if you grab the button and drag it and drop it on an object, it's not the selected object that gets fat, but actually the one you drop it on. A great example of that is Flame Inferno. So all the buttons where you have like punch in numbers, you click on them to type in a number, but you can click and drag to change the number, like a slider. And if you hold down Shift, I think, it's faster. So if you want a really high number, and Control. And if you double click on it, I think, a calculator comes up. So you can do math. Yeah. And that's really nice, because to most people, it's just a dialing. But when you start reading manual, you realize, hey, it's got more stuff. And it's not intruding. There's not like a little button next to it that says, calculator. It's not a little thing that says faster or slower. Everything is sort of hidden inside the thing. And for beginners, the feature doesn't exist.
I understand what he's saying. He's saying that it's the fact that it's not intuitive is good. It's easy to access. You don't have to do a lot of things to access it. But if you showed all that right there on the interface, in this case, it would look much more cluttered and scary to a beginner who just needs to know they can click on it and type a number. And they don't need to know that you can do all the other things, at the same time. So
you can worry about later.
I can see that point, that you can hide stuff sometimes, and it's almost good because you can still do the basic thing, and that's what the beginner does.
Yeah, but it's choosing what to hide that's the tricky one.
And what happens then if a user by accident presses shift and then left clicks something? You see something happening on the screen which he did not expect.
Right,
and he
but I
says,
think that's where feedback comes in. So long as when you do that, the widget gives you appropriate feedback so it's not confusing, then you've just discovered a feature, and what all the user said is, cool, I can do this now,
Yes, but it's not getting self-explanatory always. The number button in Blender is, as I experience it, a powerful tool. It's really, yes, you can manipulate this number by a number of ways, by 5 or 6 ways, and you cannot explain all those possibilities on a number button. It's not really possible, and you cannot do such a tooltip every time. So you have to find a way how to get the knowledge about the number buttons into the head of possibly the new user.
I'll just make a point. I used a program a while back called Moonlight Creator, and it was fairly average. It had a few nice features, but one of them was that you just had a nice status bar, and it had left click, drag, right click, drag constraint or whatever, and it just had it in the status bar. Now when you press X down, that would change. It would be right click, drag along X or whatever. Now when you were saying with it's kind of like a tooltip in a way, but it would tell you in every context what the mouse buttons would do, and that feature packing way, it would be quite understandable. You could have, it could say both keys drag this, and it could even be, say along the status bar. It doesn't have to be, a little small amount of text, a little tooltip. Something where it could be improved is if you had it in Blender and you mouse over the number button, you could have the status bar saying shift click, type in the number, click on the right. You could actually put that in there. And you put that in there. Okay, well that was in Moonlight Creator.
The point is then you would I find this a good idea. You could then pack part of the educational stuff into such a status bar, and could leave at least, for example, the number button clean. It expresses only the number and what the number is for, what the number stands for, and it would be less cluttered. And
I think it's less cluttered now. It's just the arrows. It looks quite nice. It's a number in there. It's not very big. It's fun.
Yes. Well, the arrows don't explain the return key.
Yeah, I think we can't keep talking.
I think it's not time enough, but I think it's also good to have to close this topic about button functions and things. There are a lot of other aspects we can discuss. I don't know if people want to have lunch in 10-20 minutes. It's almost 12 o'clock.
Can I just ask one question? It relates to it, but it's a different thing. Does anyone think the fan sliders that are linked to on the wiki are really cool, or is it just me? The fan sliders. I think it's on the wiki. There's a link somewhere to. It's a concept of a slider button to do number sliders, but so it looks like a slider. And if you're on axis like this, it works like a normal slider. If you pull the mouse down, it fans out like this, and it gives you more precision because you have a bigger range to slide around. So it's a very visual way. You can do it both ways. There's a cool demo. It runs on Linux. I downloaded it and tried it. And
you need a big screen there.
You don't because
the button is in the bottom.
Because the button can be tiny. The nice thing about it, the slider can be very small in the interface, and you click on it, and it works like a slider, but it doesn't give you a lot of precision. But normally, as you're a user, your hand will start to stray to the sides as you're moving a slider, and you get this bloom out effect, and it gets big and it obscures what's underneath it. But that's okay because that's what you're using. And it's not confusing because it gives visual feedback right away. So all a beginner user would say, wow, this is really cool, and they're not going to be confused by it. And for the advanced user, the demo given, you can use control key and some modifiers to do snaps in different axes, so you can get accuracy as well as this nice user-friendly changes. I thought it was great, and so I just like to tell people about it.
Where you drag in a direction like a clock. So you click and drag in a direction like a clock, and you can rotate like this, and then you can drag a little bit, or you can drag further out the line, and you get more precision by pressing. And then you can have like a circle around with band with like snaps, points you can snap to, like without rotating. Very nice.
This topic, like all the ideas people express already about, I would like to have it under button with a fan coming out of it, or I want to have a two-dimensional cone tree representation of the Blender database. I mean, then the question is, okay, we have a lot of ideas, we have a lot of people who are committed to the Blender project. How do you structure things then? Because there's a limited amount of time, there's a limited amount of energy, you cannot do everything. If you have 20 people, you also will find out there are 20 opinions, so we have to get a way of working somehow. One of the things that was mentioned already in the first beginning was, of course, okay, documentation, write down what is the core principle of the Blender architecture, or what's the core way of how Blender works. What are the few rules you try to stick to? What is consistent? What does that mean? You could do a little bit more on that, so new people can easily get in after reading the documents and help out. But that's only quite limited still. There's so many cool things you can do with the interface. Rethinking all kinds of ways of working and improving it. So how do we get to that? What is the way to do it? But not a lot of people who sit here are actually interested in developing code for interfaces. Is that right? Yeah, but I know also that I think for you as designers, for Matt, more the designer's perspective and the user's perspective, and you code because you really have to, because nobody else is doing it for you. It's very good motivation to start coding, but that's how I did it.
I would, motivate you guys to, like, it's not a gimmick. You have a really nice platform to be good at feedback by using animations. When you do stuff, usually in the classical 2D interfaces, you just click and something happens. Drop down pops up. And with Apple, you see all the, you see a dialogue that comes up from, and it's not a visual gimmick. It gives you feedback on, relating what window opened the dialogue and stuff. So I just wanted to tell you that when you do interfaces, try to make use of your platform.
I want to stick to the how topic. For example, the functionality board. Everybody knows the mailing list. In the beginning it seemed to work. Matt put a lot of work in setting up a tracker, for example, people can post ideas and discuss about it. And then it faded into something, a complaint board and a personal reflection board and not having a feature request board. That doesn't work. I hope maybe some people would bubble up out of the community with really good ideas, and people who have a lot of time to work on proposals and who can try to manage it, so they can find developers to help them actually implementing it. But I do like the dynamics of open source. We don't have to do only one thing. If there's like this crazy German inter with his instinctive blender, what did you call it? That's cool. It's challenging. Because he's sometimes doing things and then other people say, oh, I like the instinctive blender much better than I do the current blender release. That's dynamics. Because then you know we can compare. So if developers don't agree with me, there's no reason not to do it. I mean, we don't have to agree to do things. No, not agreeing is a challenge. Oh no, he thinks it's not. Well, I'm going to, That's how I work too. If somebody doesn't agree with me, I stop working. getting energy. So
Yeah, but
I
the
think
problem with that is that only people who know how to code can challenge it. I can only state my opinion or try to share my experience.
that's very
So
good at that.
yeah, no, I'm not very good at that, but it means I can't get the ideas done, or I need to find somebody to do it, which I don't want to do.
Yeah, okay.
So
but
that's
one of the topics. So how can we get the blender process? But that's also for the after processing. But this is one of the key aspects. We have users, we have designers, we have people who like to improve Blender or improve their own workflow. How can we enable them in some way that this is going to work out? That they can find the right developer to help, or that they can find a board or meetings or whatever where you can present the ideas and get feedback on it, and maybe even a stamp approved, and it goes to the coding
That's the
department.
thing about the fun board is people make points. They go, oh, here's this good thing. People go, oh yeah, I know, whatever. Nothing gets decided, so people end up posting in the BF committers or the programmers, because programmers actually see it and sometimes do it. I think the fun board maybe should have a way of reviewing something and making a conclusion on that, and then send it to the coders to have a look at it or whatever.
But you did also a lot of website work on the proposal ideas. It was very good, but it's also frustrating because I cannot read it as a personal thing you like me to do. I want it to be something that other people are going to do. But I cannot do everything. I have a very limited agenda, and I have to pick up a couple of more complex projects like cleaning up mesh editing or adding something like an outliner, which is really complex because you have to understand the Blender architecture well. And then the smaller things that are really about how to construct a composition of all the buttons and panels and how to think of really good structures for the buttons in Blender. It's something other people can do too.
How can you find tactics though? And then instead of just I have this crazy idea and I throw it out, and what I have now is I get this crazy idea and I go to IRC and or whatever and talking directly to people instead of just in my own little world, kind of this is how I like it to be. That's what I used to do, but that's right now what I do. Get to people.
If you have someone proposing some functionality, you should motivate the user to come up with something like a functional specification that you have a problem that this solves, and the task, the use case, and then when they themselves think about the functionality, they can themselves figure out, okay, well this isn't consistent with what we have, and so that you don't have the noise of every feature coming in, so that you at least have the interface, the outliner proposal was laid out, and it was like a web page document, and it had the head and the feet. It was complete, so that before you were thinking about implementation, you had something that you saw, how is this thing supposed to work.
But one of the ideas Yuri mentioned is yesterday, and he volunteered to put work on it on the website. When things like that, his outliner paper, your work, another guy, but it's important that it doesn't get lost. I have no idea when you decide just to delete that page, or all the other ideas, just your website, and then you clean up things, and then things disappear. It would be so good if we have some part of the Blender website, Blender 3D or a CMS, where somebody helps putting everything there. Make a big, nice database with articles and ideas about what you can do.
That's the
at least we can find it, and then we have a lookup.
But I heard that there is a wiki.
Yeah, the wiki is for the
wiki,
and it works really well. I mean, it's
working. But it doesn't matter what we use, or it's a CMS or wiki, but you have to find also a way that we can find it.
Yeah, but that's website organization.
Yeah,
that's communicating. That's communicating that if you have a good idea, put it there.
That can help is somebody who is responsible, who feels responsible to helping out on it and make it.
Sure, that would help.
I think the one thing is that the wiki is advertised only on the developer website.
Yeah, well, that was my point, that it was a bad idea to have it.
I think perhaps it should have the advertisement as well, too.
That's Bart's talk yesterday.
And your first question is how do we proceed, how do we get, I mean, it's involved the regular education, because Blender is for young people, has a number of nice aspects. A number of young people want to learn Python very well. They want to experiment with 3D interfaces. So you can make a lot of final examination projects and that sort of stuff. That Blender is the case. I mean, so Blender has now very fundamental issues about user interfaces. That's very nice if you for education that do things with user interfaces. That, I mean, have a good user interface for a professional community. That's quite different than just make a small web application. So I mean, so that there are nice issues. So if you can involve, I will try to do it myself. So to bring Blender, let's say, in the regular as a thing that you should use in the regular education for final examination projects, because there are a lot of challenges there.
About suggestions for new features, I really found that if you ask people like what features you want, you get a sea of ideas, and often users become sort of frustrated because why isn't anybody picking up my thing? And this is the problem, that coders want to do what they want to do. Yeah. So I suggest that coders do it instead, or both, I guess, is because when a coder says, I'm going to do a new extrude tool, they can go out and say, so what do you guys need in a new extrude tool? And then people get to be very specific about this thing. And they know that somebody's actually listening, somebody's going to work on this, somebody's going to take note, and you know that this person is assigned to doing extrudes, so I can get back to him later on, and he's really doing this. And that makes you feel more involved as a user, instead of just throwing out ideas and just hoping that somebody in the void will maybe catch them and maybe find my idea good. And it also helps the developer, because the developer can really pose the kind of questions they have. I have a direction, should I go this way or that way? Which one is useful? And then users can really tell him or her.
In Python, in the Python community, there is a nice procedure with the PEPs and so on. And so, PEPs. I don't know what's an abbreviation. It's proposal for some extension, and then there's a group around it, and there's a moderator around it, and there's a proposal, and so on top of the whole thing, there's Guido, and he is the benevolent dictator, right? So he makes the final decision. But they have a lot of issues in Python. There are certain groups, and if you have a smart idea, you can start a new group and make a proposal. And then finally it comes in the next when it is accepted by a certain board, it is in the next release. So it's good to look at the website of Python to see how that. I mean, that's a very stable community, and that has very nice procedures for keeping Python very stable and very how do you say it, to backwards compatibility issues and that sort of stuff. So it's a it's a real community, right? So and they are older, and it's nice to look. I mean, you can just take over certain things the way they do this.
Well, for development, in open source, I like to do what I like to do. It's not that I want people to tell me what to do. For that, I have a job. So in my spare time, I just like to do something that
Don't you switch it, so you do at your job what you like to do, and then for Blender you can
if it's for the same salary, it's not wrong. So I look at those feature requests, but I don't see them as a challenge for me to implement them.
Well, you made the one yourself that does the feature requests. So and then you implement it, but then you are in the director, and then people recognize somebody is working already on that feature, and then you are joined. So you
Yeah,
bring
okay,
on,
that's true, but
so you're bringing on your own features.
This is different for an artist tool like Blender than it is for something like Python, where the users are developers in a much similar case. But here we've got a lot more of a distinction where, as Yuri was saying, if an artist wants something and needs something, it's extremely hard to actually get that done if you can't find someone else who's interested in the same thing, who's willing to do it for you.
But the first thing is make it clear that you have that wish. And maybe you join somebody that wants to implement it. You never know.
now there are way too many feature requests.
Yeah, but they're not
Every
thought out.
fr-
I mean, if
You
the
don't
user
even have
doesn't really-
to
I mean, you have to clean them up. I mean, that's a user community. So
you have to filter them out.
Yeah, you have to filter them out.
But
and then-
at the
and then-
moment I block everything.
Huh?
At the moment I block everything. Like,
That's because you are doing it alone. But if you have if a group of people that are acceptable, then you can do it different.
You can really use, but that's the open source problem. A lot of people, and that's not a problem, it's good, a lot of people participate in a community like this for fun. Because it's nice people, and you can have pleasure. That's good. So we should not stop having fun.
Oh no.
So what we need is people who think it's fun to collect feature requests and software. You should not ask him to do that because he thinks that's not really funny. So I need to have you for that. And you think that's funny to do that?
Yeah, well,
Or maybe we need managers. Managers have a really boring management job in a company. They think I love to manage, and I want to have fun management. Then you can get him and say, okay, I didn't know that you're going to manage all the feature requests and make it in a nice structured diagram and give us insight in how all this stuff relates. That's the kind.